Beside the Brook, the story of someone who found the truth, written by McDonald. Beside the Brook, Chapter 8, A Christmas Party. It was Christmas Eve, and Mother was putting the finishing touches to the Christmas tree. Peggy and John had been lucky enough to have one each year during the war, but this one was specially big and specially laden. Father had gone with one of the foresters from the timber yard to choose it from the plantation before the stately rows of young firs were dug up to supply Covent Garden. Now the choice stood in a corner of the sitting-room in a tub draped with crinkly green paper. Father had twined a string of fairy lights in and out of the branches. Mother had fixed a gold star to the pointed top near the ceiling and tied pretty glass spangle things, already older than John, to the drooping branches. Holly paper, saved from year to year, was fetched out to wrap the surprise parcels. The labels were all written, and the tree could hold no more, so that other parcels were beginning to pile up round the tub. The floor was in rather a mess with string, holly leaves, cotton wool, and paper. The cake in the larder was demanding its ruffle to hide where the icing ended. The trussed chicken yawned for its stuffing, and Mother was very tired. "Have you got Teddy's presents on the tree, Mother?" called Mr. Broom. "Yes," came the reply, "and we haven't forgotten one for Ginger. Teddy asked if he might bring his cat when I sent the invitation." "Poor old chap," said Father. "I'm glad he is coming. He'd have a lonely Christmas in that queer place otherwise." Mother shuddered. "Yes, just imagine how dim and cheerless it must be these long evenings, with those branches soaring up and down on a night like this, and the mournful sound of the brook always rushing by." "But he doesn't mind," said Father. "He's one of the happiest people I've met." "Yes, and the children love him," said Mother, sprinkling sparkling snow over the fir branches. "I'm glad they're growing thoughtful. It was their idea to ask him for Christmas Day, though I would have suggested it had they not done so. I think I'll make that do for tonight. It's almost Christmas Day now." "I suppose the children haven't forgotten the stockings," said Father. "No, indeed, and John declared he would stay awake to see who filled them," said Mother. "But they've both been asleep since before 9 o'clock. The postman was puzzled next morning as he handled a large envelope bearing the address, "Teddy Ting-Tong, Mr. Wilmot's farm by the brook." The card inside, showing a family of robins disporting themselves among holly twigs, was John's own secret, and formed the only correspondence that the shepherd had received since his arrival at the shieling. "Who's it for, anyway?" asked the postman at the dairy. "Oh, that's what the Broom children call the shepherd who lives in yon hut by the brook. Leave it here, and I'll see as it," said the dairyman. "No, I'll take it myself," said the postman. "Along this way?" "That's right, over the cart bridge and along the bank. You'll find him." The postman did find Teddy, chopping sticks and talking to Ginger, who was purring and snarling over the furry hind legs of the baby rabbit. "You'll come to harm catching rabbits, Ginger. Do I no give you enough to eat that you must catch them?" he was saying. "Good morning, sir. Something for you," called the postman cheerily. "Eh, something for me?" exclaimed the old man, his hands shaking with excitement. "Only a card," said the postman. Teddy smiled. "And from a bairn," he said. "Poor laddie. It's from John, bless his heart. "Happy Christmas, postman. It was good of you to traipse along here when you could have left it at the farm." "Quite all right. I'm glad I found you," replied the postman, "and a happy Christmas to you." But to himself he said, "The poor old fellow is not likely to have much of a Christmas there." He himself was looking forward to a merry day with his rosy children around a big fire and meals fit for a king. However, the postman was mistaken, for Teddy's heart was full of the joy and peace that the angels had told those far-off shepherds about when the little Christ was born. He saw beyond the bare trees still dripping from last night's rain and the mud that plastered his heavy boots. For in his mind he beheld a picture of a bright earth lit by the presence of that same Christ returned in glory to dwell among men. Then there will be peace on earth, goodwill toward men, when he comes to take the throne of his father David in Jerusalem. Thus thinking, he gladly thanked God for his breakfast porridge and the kindliness of good friends who cheered his loneliness. Ginger had spoilt his meditations through arriving growling with the rabbit from the wood, but he consoled himself. "It's no good smacking him. It's his nature to hunt, and I cannot break him of it." Peggy and John were full of excitement as they raced along the road to church that morning. They had found their stockings bulging on the bed rail with sweets and fruits, pencils and crayons. A number of parcels left by the postman had not yet been opened. The chicken was already sizzling in the oven, and the pudding walloping about in the witch's pot. And grandest of all, Teddy Ting-Tong was coming to dinner on his first visit to their home. The church was beautifully decorated with evergreens, and the Bible message was true and direct. The organ pealed out the grand old tune, "O come, all ye faithful." But the faithful were very few, judging by the size of the congregation. The church members mostly stayed at home, reading their correspondence, stoking fires, making gravy for the turkey and sauce for the pudding, to the accompaniment of merry music over the wireless. Teddy had not arrived by the time the children returned, so they kept an eye on the path to the brook. "Here he comes!" shouted John, as Mother took down the hot plates and Peggy poured out lemonade. The shepherd, dressed in a tidy black suit, was carrying an awkward load under one arm and Ginger under the other. John ran to meet him. "Happy Christmas, Teddy! Can I help you?" "No, thank ye, laddie. You mustna see all that's here yet. Yon was a bonny greeting you sent me." John flushed with pleasure. "I'm glad you liked it," he said. "We have had a lot." Leaving his parcels in the porch, Teddy entered the house and set the cat free. "Welcome to you, Mr. Gray," smiled Mrs. Broom, hurrying from the kitchen to shake the shepherd's hand. "You are our only visitor today, and we are really glad to have you." "You've just arrived in the nick of time," said Father, "for I'm about to carve the fowl." The children gaily bore Teddy to the table and sat on each side. A pot of golden chrysanthemums and holly stood in the centre, and the firelight from the logs blazing on the hearth danced on the glass and cutlery, so that the whole was a festive sight. When all was served, Mr. Broom gave thanks to God for the meal, not repeating the usual set phrases, but saying a few sincere words of his own composing, for the children's account of the old shepherd and his ways had affected him. How good was the stuffing! How tender the chicken! But in the middle of the enjoyment a terrible thought crossed John's mind, and he put back a forkful of meat on his plate. "What is it, dear?" asked Mother in a whisper. "Are we eating speckled feather?" he whispered back. "No, dear, of course not. She was buried last week. Daddy got this one from Mr. Wilmot." So John resumed the enjoyment of the meal. The pudding glistened darkly with fruit. Peggy had the sixpence and John a silver threepenny bit, saved for the occasion. It was a merry meal, and after it was cleared away, Ginger crunched up the pieces with his head sideways on the kitchen floor. "We're going to light the tree this afternoon and give away the presents," explained John to Teddy, as they all drew in a ring round the fire. "Are you enjoying yourself?" My lad. This reminds me of long ago, when my own wee John—" The words trailed away into thought as he fastened his eyes on the red fire whose embers seemed to hold pictures of a cosy home long gone. The afternoon sky was growing dark, so that the coloured lights on the tree shone out in beauty. "I think we should ask our guest to hand round the presents," suggested Mother. "Daddy, will you please get them off the tree for Mr. Gray?" Teddy wondered if he could manage, but everyone assured him that he could, so he put on his spectacles while Daddy handed him the first parcel. "To Mother, from Peggy and John," he read from the label. "Whatever can this be?" said Mother, removing the paper. "You'll love it," said John, who was hopping about in excitement. "You need one, so we got it," said Peggy. When it emerged from its final covering, Mother was well pleased with what she received, for it was a useful apron, very much like a butcher's, but of various colours. "My dears," she exclaimed, "this is just what I want. Bless your little hearts for thinking of it." Teddy was already handling the next present. "To Peggy, from Mummy and Daddy." Peggy's heart beat fast. Was she to get what she wanted most? Perhaps she was too old for one. Still, the parcel looked the right shape. She undid the paper at the fatter end. Yes! It was a beautiful doll with long real hair, in a pink party frock, white socks and black shining shoes. Peggy's cup of joy was full. Running first to Mother and then to Father, she hugged them and kissed them. All through the dark war years she had gone without a doll, because they were either too scarce or too expensive to be bought. "Why, this one is for myself," said Teddy, and was about to lay it down before opening it when John said, "Please undo it." "Yes, please do," echoed Peggy. What did he find inside but a pair of leather slippers lined with sheep's wool from Mr. and Mrs. Broom? "However, I cannot thank you enough," said the old man. "I've never had the like since Mother was alive." "Those will keep you warm in your house," said Peggy, who nearly betrayed the fact that there was something else to keep him warm waiting at the foot of the tree. "For John, from Mummy and Daddy," read out Teddy on the next parcel. John lost no time in discovering the nature of his gift. A wonderful set of carpentry tools, consisting of saw, hammer, gimlet, and other requirements. Very little had been forgotten, for Daddy knew just which tools John favoured, those being the same that were most often missing from his workshop. "For a Daddy, from Peggy and John," was the address on the next parcel. "Perhaps I have a new shirt," said Father, but he was wrong, for his gift consisted of a generous supply of writing paper and envelopes wrapped in a thick wad of pink blotting paper, and his apparent delight with it put an end to Peggy's doubts about the worthiness of it. There were many other gifts, big and small, on the tree. Some could not be opened, but must wait to be delivered in the village, for Mother and the children had thought of poor old Mrs. Dowding, Tommy Sherfield, who was ill, and Mrs. Westcott's children, whose father had been lost at sea. There was even a kipper for Ginger, who was quite ready to start eating it on top of his sumptuous dinner, but his master confiscated it. "I dinna ken what will be the end of you, Ginger," he said, remembering the rabbit. But the cat did not care. He planted himself in front of the fire and purred like a kettle drum. The old shepherd seemed overcome when he discovered that 2 more gifts awaited him: a stone-hot water bottle from Peggy and a warm blanket with a red border from John. "Och, I'm forgetting myself," he exclaimed, making for the door. "I have some wee gifts too." He returned with 3 clumsy parcels which seemed anything but small. The long one resolved itself into a fine birch broom for father, and the square ones into a work basket for Peggy and a shopping basket for mother, all products of the forest and the old man's skilful fingers. Everyone marvelled at the gifts. "How ever did you make them?" they asked. John was silent, for it seemed that he had been forgotten, and Teddy made no explanation. Presently he slapped his knee. "Laddie, I've left yours at home," he said. "Oh, yet no. I did pick it up." He felt in his pockets. "Ah, yes, here it is," he said, and fetched out a Bible bound in blue with a ribbon hanging from the red-edged pages. "Oh, how lovely!" cried John. "And it's got pictures." The Christmas tree glowed more brightly as the afternoon closed in. The flames leapt around every fresh log placed upon the embers, and sparks flew up the chimney like chains of stars in a black sky. Hearts glowed too with love and kindliness, while the wind whipped itself into a gale without, and sometimes bellowed down the wide chimney. "That wind makes me think of poor old King Wenceslas plodding along with his boy behind him," observed father. "Page and monarch, forth they went together, through the rude wind's wild lament and the bitter weather." "That gives me an idea," said Mrs. Broom. "Let's sing some carols." "Yes, do let us," cried the children. Mother found the music and opened the piano, while Peggy and John got each side of her, for they did not know all the words. They sang all the favourites, while shepherds watched their flocks, hark the herald angels sing, and Christians awake, while father chimed in at the parts he knew, and pushed roasting chestnuts about with the poker. "Oh, here's Noel," said Peggy, who was turning the pages. "Let's sing it all." So they sang it all, and as it was a very long one with 6 verses, and as many choruses as one can find breath for, they stopped at the end of it for a long rest, though father was inclined to go on singing "Noel" in spite of that. Teddy had not heard all the words before, so he asked for the carol book, adjusted his spectacles, and started to read them. When he reached the last verse he stopped and said, "That's not right." "What isn't?" asked mother. Teddy read the verse aloud. "Then let us all with one accord sing praises to our heavenly Lord, who hath made heaven and earth of naught, and with his blood mankind hath bought." "Why not?" asked mother, who would have been shocked had anyone else suggested a fault. "Jesus Christ is reckoned to be the Creator in that verse," said the shepherd. "Well, isn't that so?" put in Mr. Broom. "God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost are one. The Trinity, the Three in One, is one of the main doctrines of the Church." "But not of the truth," said the old man, who had recently gone into the matter with Kenneth. "God the Father was the creator of heaven and earth and all living things, but the human pair that he made sinned and separated themselves and their children from him. God therefore planned to send a Son who, by the giving up of his own perfect life, should redeem mankind from death. So in due time God sent his Son Jesus, whose birthday we remember today. He was not the Creator, for the Son did not exist from the beginning, except in the Father's mind. Mother was interested. "Then you don't believe in the Trinity?" she asked. "No, indeed," said the shepherd. "The Scriptures do not support the idea." "Then what is the Holy Ghost?" asked Mrs. Broom. "It is another name for the Holy Spirit," explained Mr. Gray. "It is the divine power which comes directly from God to work his will." "Where do you get your ideas from?" asked Father, sitting in his armchair. "Solely from the Bible," answered Teddy. "It's hard to understand, but I'm being helped, and if it please God, I shall know the truth one day." "What country was Jesus king of?" asked John, anxious to take part in the conversation. "It says the wise men were seeking a king." "Not of any country, dear," said Mother. "Jesus ought to be king over our hearts." "Excuse me, Mrs. Broom," said Teddy. "That's the common idea, but Jesus will be a real king, not over men's hearts only, but over all countries of the earth, with a real throne at his real capital, Jerusalem." Mother looked hard at him. "You surprise me," she said. "The Scriptures will surprise you if you read them properly," said Teddy. "Can you prove all your statements?" asked Mr. Broom. "Yes, I can," replied the old man with conviction. "Sometime I'd like you to do so," said Mother. "But now, if you'll excuse me, I must see about getting tea." That meal was as merry as the last, though no one felt particularly ready for it. Crackers were the main attraction, and the bright paper hats discovered inside them provided much fun, for Teddy had a bonnet with strings, and Father a pirate's cap. The gale outside made no difference to anyone, save that it caused the semicircle round the fire to draw closer. "Who was wee John, Teddy?" asked Peggy, suddenly remembering his remark in the afternoon. The shepherd smiled at her and gave a sigh. "Wee John was my own laddie, Peggy," he said, "but I havena seen him for many a day." No one asked any more questions, but Teddy himself began his tale. "The three of us, Mother, that is my wife, and John and I, lived in a cosy cottage in the Braid Hills. I was a shepherd to a sheep farmer there. John was a good, obedient lad, and loved his home. But when he grew up, he was not content to be a countryman. He would go to Edinburgh, and there he mixed with folk he should have avoided. Mother and I were not pleased with his manner of life, and he knew it. His visits home became fewer until the time that he asked us for our savings. Whatever we had saved would have been his one day, but he begged us to give him his portion then. Mother, with her generous heart, was all for letting him have it. He did not tell us why he wanted it, but we imagined it might be to help him out of some trouble that had befallen him. We gave in, and he departed. We have never seen him since. We both grieved that our boy did not tell us of his trouble." Teddy stopped, and Mother asked gently, "Have you any idea where he went?" We heard from him once more. He wrote from an address in London a year afterwards, and that was the last we heard. John might as well be dead. We lived in the cottage till Mother died 11 years ago now. It was terribly lonely without her, but the good Lord comforted me, and I began to read my Bible as never before. I should have stayed on in the wee house, but the one night in the lambing season, when an unforeseen snowstorm blew from the north, I left the fireside to see to the ewes. That night my home was burnt out, though neighbours saved just a few things, among them the photograph of Mother, and I was glad of that. "What made you leave Scotland?" asked Mr. Broom. "Well," said Teddy, "I was sorely puzzled what to do. I had lost everything but health, and that is one of life's greatest blessings. So I decided to come to England as a drover. I worked my way to Lancashire and on to the Midlands, and gradually reached the south." "Where did you get your house?" asked John. Teddy smiled. "At the Devices," they replied. "Finding lodgings was my chief worry, and I didn't like some of the people I was thrown against." "So you decided to become independent?" asked Mr. Broom. "Yes," replied the old man, "and though the shilling is rough and poor, I have found great peace in it. For happiness is a matter of the mind, not of circumstance, and I am well content." "Ginger seems to appreciate comfort," smiled Mother. "But Ginger chose to come and live with me. I left the dairy farm for the shilling, didn't you, old chap?" The cat rose and waved his tail to acknowledge his master's fond rub. There was silence for a while, then Mrs. Broom spoke. "Yours is a sad story, Mr. Gray," she said, "but perhaps, like Job's, it will have a happy ending." "I'm happy now," protested Teddy, "but I have an idea that life may be happier yet." 364 days till next Christmas," sighed John later in the evening as he saw the hands of the clock move round to his bedtime. "I love Christmas." "So do I," said Peggy. "Everyone seems to like everybody else a bit more at Christmas time." "That's the right spirit," said Teddy. "You have given me much cheer and joy today, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart." "Your company has been most enjoyable too," Mother assured him, as he set off home with his presents under one arm and Ginger under the other, preceded by Father with a storm lantern and a bag of mince pies. "Good night, and come again, Teddy," called the children as the wind-swept figures made their way to the bridge across the brook. That night, as the shepherd lay down in his bunk, with Ginger curled up underneath, he said a little prayer. "I thank thee, O Lord, for all this kindness of heart."